the most important thing is like solving the customer's problem. And like, you don't need to have a whiz bang shiny app to do it. It's like, for us, it's like, what is solving the problem? It's, let's say, our care home customer at that point. It's like when they need a shift filled, a nurse fills a shift, they turn up and they enjoy working together, they get paid. Fantastic. Now, you can do a lot of that, in fact, all of it, without a whiz bang shiny app in the middle. Have some happy customers that are willing to talk to you, give you feedback, give you a bit of rope to hang yourself, and then you can go back and build again.
Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook Podcast, where we share inspiring startup stories with practical takeaways for you, the listener. Today's guest is Charles Armitage, the co-founder of Florence. It's an app that pairs care professionals with care organisations to make sure that all the patient needs are being met and to provide the flexibility that the system so often needs that hasn't been available so far. They've raised over $45 million in funding so far because it's an app that could truly make a difference to how the healthcare organisation and industry is run. Charles himself was a doctor and saw these problems firsthand, and it's now expanding to multiple countries across the world. This was a delightful conversation and I can't wait for you to hear it. So let's get on to the show. Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook, Charles. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Amar. It's great to be here.
So I'm loving the penguin wallpaper for people watching on YouTube. You've founded Florence now, but you've got a long history in what you've been doing before that. Can you tell us your journey to becoming a founder, becoming an entrepreneur?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So I started Florence with my co-founder, Dan, at the beginning of 2017. Before that, I was working as a doctor in the NHS, as a surgeon. Lots of places around the country, doing lots of different things. It was great experience, taught me a huge amount, but it also kind of exposed me to some of the problems we were looking to solve. So I guess jumping straight in, one of the biggest challenges we've got at the moment, I think, across whole society is how we kind of build a healthcare workforce to scale and meet the needs of like an aging population. And certainly when I was working in the NHS, I could see day in, day out some of the workforce challenges that existed, and it's like become an even more hot topic in the last 5 years that we've been doing Florence. But essentially the challenge is that there are not enough nurses and care workers in the country or in the world to deal with the demands of our aging population. What ends up happening is there's a large reliance on temporary staffing agencies to kind of fill gaps. And actually a lot of the kind of workforce practices across the NHS and social care are really like not fit for practice, very offline, undigital, poor user experience, very inefficient, expensive. So what we're trying to do at Florence is build the technology to power that healthcare workforce.
Like, it's interesting what you said there as well, because I think so many people, when they think about entrepreneurship, they think about building their own business. They're really focused on like Gen Z and like what are young people thinking. Whereas as you said, like one of the big problems that society is facing is actually on the other side of things, the elderly population. And there's also a lot of demand there, but maybe that's an area that a lot of people overlook. And what made you believe that like you and your co-founder could tackle this problem? Like what made you quit your job as a doctor to do this?
I think having a deep understanding of the problem is quite important, and not just having a sort of 30,000 feet consulting kind of level of a problem. It's like really being in there day in, day out and living it is I think one of the keys to our success. So my co-founder Dan, he came from the other side of the equation where he was had an exec position, non-exec position, looking after a elderly person's housing charity. So kind of experienced some of those healthcare staffing challenges. But yeah, I mean, if day in, day out, you're going into work and you're kind of seeing the problem presented in front of you, you really understand it deeply, kind of coming up with a solution to that is kind of the easy part. And I like, piece of advice number one, I think, to all kind of budding entrepreneurs out there is don't start with a solution, start fully trying to understand and identify the problem that your customers have and go from there. And I always say that if you can't find 10 people that you can pick up the phone to and say, hey, look, what do you think about this problem? And they reply to you with like, this is the worst thing that I have to deal with. Oh my God, if you could solve this for me, this would be this would make my life so much easier. If you can't have those conversations, then you're probably not quite looking in the right place.
Yeah. And once you quit your job, what was the process like at that stage? Was it onboarding pretty quickly, or did you have a lot of research after you quit your job as well? Like, when did you do that research phase?
I carried on working as a doctor whilst starting Florence for about 6 months, I think. So I was lucky that actually the job I was doing at that point was quite flexible. So I was actually doing agency shifts, temp staffing shifts in healthcare. So I was able to kind of ramp it up and ramp it down as needed. So which was useful because it meant I could work, 3 days a week being a doctor, pay my bills, get some cash in, and then 4 days a week I could focus on Florence. Yeah, and I did that for about 6 months, and then it got to a point where, definitely, was at a crossroads where I knew that if I wanted to take it to the next level, I had to, jump in with both feet. But by that point, when I jumped in, I don't think we were generating revenue, but there was definitely, we had customers, we had people using an early MVP. I think we had a small amount of early investment. So it was not, a real jump into the unknown. There was definitely I could see a sequence of events that got us to a point where I could make a living off it.
And for the people listening, who are those early customers? How did you get them on board? How did you convince those first people?
Most of what Florence does today is a temporary staffing marketplace for healthcare. So we help nurses and carers connect with available shifts across social care and the NHS. And at the time, we were very, very focused on building that marketplace in a hyperlocal way in London. And so what we needed to get started, marketplace business as well. So you can't just get one side of customers. You have to get both supply and demand and get them to arrive together. I started on the demand side. So I got a list of all the care homes in London, and I just picked up the phone and started calling all of them. And, after about 100 calls, you get the first person who's potentially interested. And then I went and visited them and explored some of their challenges, got to know them better, built some trust, and went from there. And I think at that point, we had the first customer on, the first demand side of the marketplace. And I was like, okay, cool. I've now got to go and find 10 nurses and onboard them into the platform and start transacting. But that first customer was just cold calling to the point where I got a meeting, and then I went in and then just had to really focus on building super strong relationships because, predictably, it all went wrong at multiple points. And unless you have that kind of trust and relationships to fall back on, it doesn't work.
How did you build that trust? Because it's something I often think about, where a lot of people try to lead you with how competent you are, but a lot of it's to do with how reliable and trustworthy you are. Because, as you said, things are going to go wrong, especially when it's a new company, when you're doing something for the first time. If you rely on, we're never going to get anything wrong, you completely trust us in that way, you're probably going to let them down, and then all comes falling apart. Whereas if they can trust you to say, we're going to be able to work this out, we're going to have problems, but whatever happens to you, we're going to be able to figure something out, and we're going to be your partner. Is that the kind of relationship you tried to build with them? Or how did you, because obviously you couldn't just say, we're definitely going to get everything to work.
Yeah, no, absolutely, 100%. And I think we were very clear from the outset that this was you are our first customer. It is not going to be a seamless experience by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm really trying to understand what you need to achieve and what makes you successful as my customer. And as you say, I'm going to bend over backwards to make sure you achieve that success. And yes, it's not going to be very smooth, and the app might not work very well, and people might turn up late or cancel or whatever. But really do believe that I'm going to try as hard as I can to come through for you. And it helps that if you have that first customer is willing to take a bit of a risk, and you can build a personal relationship. But definitely, if you go into that early relationship with projecting an air of infallibility, as soon as things go wrong, then the walls crumble down and you'll fail. But it's a balance though, because you obviously don't want to look like a mug. You need to make sure that people can trust that you're hardworking, you're clever, and you're going to solve the problems. But you have to be realistic with what you're trying to achieve. Definitely.
Yeah, I think it's this whole idea of fake it till you make it. Right? It's where you didn't fake it because you just said, you're our first customer. We're going to do our very best for you. And there might be some problems, but we've got the expertise, we've got the experience. We know as a team that we can work this out. And it creates them as more of a partner to you rather than just somebody who's a bank. And that's that trust and that vulnerability, I think, showing that really helps. And obviously, since that first customer, you've scaled a long way since then. And what was it like in terms of getting your first funding and getting that backing and investment?
Our first funding. So our first sort of external funding we got relatively early on. A kind of an angel investor put some money in relatively early on. It was at a point where I think we were pre-revenue, but only just, in the sense of, again, we had like customers, we had an MVP, and we were starting to transact, but it was definitely very, very early. It was like a very unproven model. Yeah, I remember thinking, we started this thing, and then suddenly we raised £100,000 as our first like pre-seed round or something, which that doesn't feel like a huge amount of money, but it was at the time it was massive. I was like, gosh, how do we get that out of nowhere? But it was good because it meant we could hire some people. We hired our first software developer and someone to run marketing, and they did an amazing job getting us from like that 0 to 1. So it changed everything.
As you said, like you didn't come from a finance background or this kind of world. And a lot of people listening are probably in the same position where maybe they've got a big idea for an app or something which they think could really change their industry, but have no idea how they'd go about getting funding or getting people to invest in them. How much of that was novel to you in terms of, was it something that scared you? Was it something that excited you? How did you feel about that process? And obviously, you've now gone on to raise significantly more as well. In that process, how do you feel about it? Is it something which kind of scares you, excites you?
Yeah, it's extremely exciting. Yeah, no, it doesn't scare me. At the very beginning, when we started, I literally knew nothing. I wasn't even, particularly plugged into, information sources like the Entrepreneur's Handbook, right? I was definitely not like in the tech scene at all. I guess just kind of saw a problem and thought we could create a better solution. But it's just about learning. So, there are so many resources out there that can basically take you through every single stage of the journey. And I'm still to this day, like frequently a few times every week, I'm cutting around the internet, trying to solve a question, typing it into Google and seeing what comes out. And you get a lot of good advice there. And I was also pretty lucky in that, I guess from a very early stage, I managed to, build a kind of small, close network of mentors that, are so useful. And I think the people that I've got most value from on this journey have been basically people that have doing what I'm doing, but maybe a year or two ahead, or people at the same time. People doing things at the same level as you, or like a year or two ahead, because their lived experience is so relevant, and the problems they solved are basically exactly the same. As you build a company through certain stages, everyone has to tackle the same problems. They might come in slightly different orders, but it's essentially a rinse and repeat formula all the way up. And so if you can speak to people who, last year had this challenge with how to, build out a sales organization or, raise some money or whatever it is, that's where you get the best advice from. And then the kind of more slightly sort of like grey-haired non-exec person who, theoretically has loads of experience. You can be lucky with that, but I often find it's just not as relevant and it's not as scrappy as the kind of the help that you need. You need to have learnings from people that have like scrapped and fought in the same way that you've done.
And especially people who are coming from like non-traditional backgrounds where like this entire tech world is new to you, and sometimes it intimidates people. But you've been able to do that to get funding, to get customers, to grow the business out. And like for people looking to gain mentorship or to gain people who are in the similar space to them, how did you find those people? Where do they connect with you through?
I think my co-founder Dan had a sort of a bit of a network. I early on in doing Florence got a sort of a desk in a co-working space. It was super cheap. It was a bit dirty, but it was like full of like early stage companies that were basically at our stage or like a little bit ahead. And that was very useful because, sitting around the coffee machine every day, building relationships with people and talking to them is super useful. And that was definitely quite a strong early source of building like expertise and knowledge and network. Definitely.
Yeah. So I've got the same thing as myself where I go to a co-working space most days, and that allows me to just chat to people around me because you just never know. Sometimes the person opposite you has done the exact same thing you're doing or has gone through that same problem. And at the same time, they might be looking for somebody to help them with something else. And you know what you're doing there. And it's like kind of connecting entrepreneurs together is like so useful because as you said, there's so many resources online, but sometimes when you've got somebody who's can like tailor that to your specific problem, your scenario, that helps so much.
100%, 100%.
And like looking at like the last couple of years, obviously with COVID, that must have had quite a big impact on your business. How did that affect you?
It did have a big impact, yeah. So, what we do is we help nurses and care workers connect to vacant shifts across NHS and social care, and there's clearly been quite a dynamic industry over the last 2 years. So we actually went through two kind of really distinct phases. So the first half of the pandemic was really, really challenging for us. So there were lots of rules and regulations that came in from central government that really kind of hampered our ability to grow. So, for example, one of them was that a rule was brought in that nurses couldn't move between different healthcare environments, like between hospital A and hospital B, unless they had like a 2-week cool down period in between to stop the spread of infection. A large part of our business model is helping create that flexibility and portability of labour. So we had to flex pretty quickly to that and change the product a lot and change the way we operated.
And then now that things are opening up a bit more and hopefully we're seeing more of a return to normality, how does that experience in COVID like help you? Because of obviously the process you've set up, and sometimes going through that struggle must have helped you in some ways because you had to be more streamlined and more efficient. Was there anything that you took from like the pandemic years that really helps you now?
Yeah, I think there's like a kind of like a better understanding of our own resilience, I suppose. That if I look back actually on, the period that we went through of essentially 12 months of not really growing at all, burning a load of cash, every month thinking, are we going to get out of this? Are we going to get out of this? Are we going to get out of this? And I remember it being quite bad, but I don't remember it being, disastrous. And I guess that gives me some like succor and a bit of an understanding that actually myself, my co-founder, my team, my leadership team, the rest of the team, we do actually have the minerals to weather those storms. So, if something else comes up ahead, like we can do it. We've done it before, we can do it again. So yeah, I think it's it was all very difficult, all very challenging, but we've definitely come out the other side much stronger. Or I know I have, definitely.
And you mentioned about the layoffs as well, and like the amazing team you've got left. How was that process for you in terms of like hiring your first employees? And like when you were a doctor, did you manage people? I guess you would have done if you were there for several years. How did that process translate? Was there any like lessons you took from managing people in the NHS maybe and applying them here? Or was it just completely new like experience?
There isn't really a concept of like people management in the NHS. There's you might manage a team from a sort of like workflow perspective, like we need to do this, and this today, but there's no really what management is, which is trying to understand the people you work with, what they want from life, what their drivers are, what success looks like to them, what's getting them in the way of them achieving that success. That concept just doesn't exist in the NHS. More fool them. There's just no imperative or incentive around kind of like modern management practices. So I knew nothing. And still don't. Yeah, I mean, I'm learning, but I think to become a hiring, onboarding, managing, training people, developing them, making them work in the best way they can is like a lifelong learning experience, and you never quite crack it.
What are some of the lessons you've learned so far about that?
One of the things that I find challenging, but I know I need to lean into and be better at, is the importance of being as transparent and as honest and as open as you can be with people. And for me, I can sometimes find it hard to provide constructive feedback or, tell people where they're falling short or why it's not working. That can be a hard message to deliver, but it is always a good message to deliver. And it always, even if it's a challenging message, it is always better to deliver a challenging message than to not deliver it because people know there's something going on and you're not telling them about it. They don't feel safe, and that's a much worse feeling than if you're just open about how this relationship is going. And so even if it's so having that bravery and having that ability to be as transparent, as clear, and direct as possible is I think I can always do that more. I think it's how I'd want to be treated as well. Like if I have a boss, well, I guess I do to some extent my investors, I'm constantly saying to them, just like, be clear with me, like tell me what, like don't beat around the bush, like be as direct as possible, because that's how I'm going to know if we're on or off track.
How many employees does Florence have now?
We have 160 people in the UK.
And how does that change that? I guess with how much of it is centralized, how many people work in different places? What's that kind of model looking like?
So we have 3 offices. We have our office in London, one in Birmingham, and one in Glasgow, and actually one in Northern Ireland as well. So three and a bit. And in London, we have our kind of like central functions. So technology, marketing, finance, people. I sit in London, product, and some customer success. And then in Birmingham and Glasgow, we have a lot of our kind of, customer facing sales, customer success, customer service, account management teams. And we're about 50 between those offices.
And what was the logic behind that split in terms of having those 3 cities and Northern Ireland as well?
I mean, it's kind of more administrative than anything else. So in Scotland, we're regulated, so we need to have a local operational office in Scotland. So we have that in Glasgow, and then Birmingham is where one of our team members who manages that office lives, and it's a great place to hire talent. And it's in the middle of the country, and it means we can serve a lot of our customers quite easily. And then London, that's where we started, and that's where I work. But I think it's probably where it's easy to find talent from a stuff like tech, product, marketing perspective.
You mentioned there about regulation. Obviously, going into the industry there's obviously a lot of regulation, and it affected during COVID as well. And how do you kind of keep on top of that? Like, especially at the beginning when you didn't maybe have many employees yet, how much of a barrier was that to you in terms of growth and trying to work out the right way to go forwards?
It was much easier at the beginning than it is now, because at the beginning it all comes down to communication. And let's say, for example, there's a regulatory change and something happens and there's a change of rules and we need to adapt and move with it. When there's only 6 people in the company and they're all sitting around the same desk, it's just like, oh, hi, yeah, cool, wicked, we all understood that, great, let's do it. So it's very easy to communicate a sort of a critical change like that. When you've got like a dispersed office across multiple places with like, let's say there's a change to one of the policies that the healthcare regulator says you need to have. That might impact like our worker onboarding, it might impact our sales, it might impact our clinical team, it might impact our product or marketing. And then you've suddenly got all these dispersed teams that are all impacted by this change. And that's where the challenge comes in. Because you identify this thing that needs to happen. It's not always totally clear whether you should or shouldn't do the thing that it says you should do. And so then whatever your decision is, yes, no, we're going to change our mind, we're going to change our processes and policies, then enacting that seamlessly across the organization at the same time is quite challenging.
Yeah, and obviously, like, you're looking to grow further now as well. And what's the ambitions for Florence? Like, how much do you want to grow?
I mean, we want to grow. We want to grow a lot. I think ultimately we want to be the go-to healthcare staffing platform for globally across the whole world. So we've just raised this funding round a few months ago, and so we're launching in 3 international markets at the moment across Europe and North America, and we have big ambitions.
In terms of that, how do you manage that? Because obviously the regulatory side of things is obviously quite different in different countries. What's your kind of plan in that aspect? Do you need to kind of hire lots of local people to help you deal with that, or what's the plan?
100%. Yeah, 100%. So the success of a country launch lives and dies on the quality of the leadership in country, on the person you get in as that country manager or general manager. So we're on the hunt now for GMs in some of our new markets. but 100%, the current operating model that we foresee, we haven't done it before, so we don't know, is, strong country manager surrounded by, their kind of go-to-market and customer-facing teams, leveraging resources from UK HQ, especially around things like product engineering, comms, finance, people, all that stuff. But with a very high quality, empowered, well rewarded, and highly valued local teams. And I think unless you can build that like culture of, like, one of the things that I haven't done it before, but from speaking to people, it sounds like that one of the biggest mistakes you can make when building a new country or building a new market is not giving everything to making sure that new market doesn't feel like a satellite state, that it feels like as much of a part of the central org as the office in Shoreditch in London. So really got to lean into that.
Yeah, and so you're launching at 3 different markets at the same time, right? Or is it a staggered launch?
Yeah, I mean, it's staggered, but quite quickly staggered. So 2 months, 2 months, 2 months.
Okay, and what's your kind of involvement in that? Are you going to those countries yourself, and like how do you spread your time?
Yes, so going to countries myself, but we've built a dedicated like launch team here in the UK, team of 1 at the moment, but it will be bigger. But yeah, we got a guy who focuses on priming those new markets. So myself and my co-founder Dan are involved, and we go and visit the local markets. We go and try and hire talent, but the actual execution belongs to a dedicated launch team. And what we do is we have, for example, one market we're going to now, we're hiring a country manager. I was there last week for a couple of weeks. I've been there for the last couple of weeks, meeting potential customers, finding out what's going on in the market, trying to find a country manager. Then we're getting like strong cultural champions from the UK to go and do a secondment for 3 months to that market, to go and, help onboard and train new starters, be that like link point and connection and build trust between the offices. And then they build a team around that infrastructure.
And how did you pick the markets you're going to enter?
We did an exercise where we kind of had 6 factors that we looked at that we thought were like made Florence likely to be successful, sort of favorable factors. So, size of the market, workforce supply problems, regulatory environment, ease of business, competition. And then we kind of graded countries in all of those different parameters and then took the top 3. But it's not an exact science.
In terms of like the growth as well, how long would it take to kind of really settle down in like each of those markets? Is it some countries fairly rapid? Because I imagine because of the nature of the industry, it might sometimes take a little bit of time. Or what, like let's say in the next few years, like where do you expect to be there?
I think it'll take about a year from starting to know whether we're going to be successful or not. So we have, I guess we have some experience in like new markets from when we've grown in the UK. For example, like when we started our Scotland office, that was, a new market at the time. And, you can see the sort of numbers trajectory of how that went, and that's been successful. And so I guess, you draw that line on the graph, and if you're below it, then it's not good. And if you're above it in these new markets, then it's great. But the truth is, realistically, is we're going to these 3 places because there is a high risk of failure in each of them. That although theoretically the sort of like macro environmental challenge around a shortage of healthcare staff exists in all of these markets, the idiosyncrasies of each one can be such that you're just not going to be successful. And you don't know that really. You can do as much desk-based research as you want and as much talking to people, but until you really try and solve those problems, you can't really be sure whether you're going to be able to solve or not. So there's a huge amount of like execution risk just from a market perspective, but also from a people perspective. And if you get, even the best hiring process or hiring manager in the world can't guarantee that you're going to get the right person in that role. So a combination of both, local market risks and personnel risks associated with starting a new market means that it is inherently a really risky thing to do.
Looking at it as well, so it's really exciting to see like where you're going to head with that. And with the product itself, how are you imagining that? Like what you've got at the moment, I guess you're still iterating on it, but how do you think that can really disrupt these markets? Like what is it about the Florence app itself or the Florence marketplace that was really going to make that difference?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. In different markets, it'll be different things from actually speaking to people. And it's not like what we think our secret sauce is in the UK. It's not necessarily going to be our secret sauce in, France. But ultimately, like, our core product is a marketplace for temporary staffing in healthcare, right? And it brings together nurses and care workers and hospitals and nursing homes and long-term care facilities looking to fill their shifts. And we do that extremely well. But it's not just about that. We think that if we can do other things to build value on both the supply and demand side of our marketplace, it improves the two things that are most important, like how easy is it to acquire our users and how easy is it to retain them. So from a nursing and care work perspective, we're really like leaning into our academy, which is our learning and development platform. So we want to be like the place where our nurses and care workers, or actually any nurses and care workers, can go to really like power up their professional development. They can learn for free, they can build community, and they can kind of operate at the top of their game. And that's a really exciting thing that we want to be, that we're putting a lot of resource into at the moment. And then on the demand side, on the healthcare provider side, how can we extend our marketplace from just managing temporary staff to helping them manage their entire workforce? And by doing that, we become hopefully a very sticky product with deep insights into their workforce data. And then we can use that to kind of build the marketplace.
I imagine as well that on the care home side and the establishment side, you have to kind of have these individual relationships because they're each businesses on their own. But on the nursing side, how are you reaching those people? How are you reaching the nurses to let them know this product exists and for them to gain the benefits?
I mean, that's mainly a marketing-led activity. So, our biggest channels are paid social, and then organic search, and then referrals. And essentially through one of those, mainly three channels, there are a few others, but one of those three channels, nurses and care workers arrive at our website or arrive in the app store, they download our product, download our app, and we onboard them. But even in that onboarding process, because, if someone signs up to Florence, you can't just let anyone come in and, say that they're a nurse and do a nursing shift, right? You've got to do a huge amount of vetting and credentialing and onboarding. So we have a very kind of bespoke, customized and user-centric way of onboarding them. We have a big team that goes out and helps people get through that funnel.
Is there any of those tactics used in particular that's really helped you to gain nurses to come into the platform? Was there a particular campaign or anything like that you think really made a difference?
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, it was all about just experimenting with many, many different channels. We didn't have one silver bullet Airbnb, Craigslist kind of story. It was just experimenting on loads of different channels. We ended up finding that, it's a bit boring, but paid Facebook marketing worked incredibly well for us because we could be really targeted geographically and really targeted about people's interests and therefore essentially job role. So, we could switch on nurse adverts in Portsmouth and you would have a very well-defined population that was seeing our assets, and you optimize those campaigns, and they became extremely successful. So that ultimately ended up being kind of our silver bullet.
And let's say you were to build Florence today from scratch with all the knowledge you've built up over the last few years. Is there anything you do differently because of the lessons you learned along the way?
Maybe rolling back right to the beginning. So I remember when it was just me and my co-founder, Dan, he put a bit of cash in to start off with, not very much, a bit. And neither of us knew anything. And so we took almost all of our money and spent it on an offshore app development process. And not knowing anything about product development or building or engineering, we said, we need to do these 40 things that are all super important and all completely essential for us to be able to use this product. And we need it done in 2 weeks, deliver a completed version of this to us in a period of time. And obviously someone on the internet says they can do that. And then obviously it was a disaster. And it was just a completely unused, and then you give this app to your customers and they go, this is completely unusable, irrelevant to my problem that I'm trying to solve. There was no iteration, there was no feedback. It was engineering-wise disaster. So we ended up having to throw it all away. So all of that initial investment we spent on that, we just chucked in the bin. And then so we were like, shit, what are we going to do? We had our early customers at that point. We were trying to get things going. So we ended up just having to, pull together a sort of like, and our MVP ended up being a Google Sheet essentially. So, Google Sheet where the customer would go in, the care home would go, these are the shifts I need filled. And then our nurses that we'd onboarded would also, they'd get a notification, and we did some like stuff with Zapier. And then they would go in and sign up to the shifts they want us to do. And that was it. And then off the back of that, we then got some investment that allowed us to hire some people. But, firm learning from that is don't spend loads of money building a product if there's a way you can do it faster, more iteratively and cheaper using Google Sheets and Zapier and all those kind of other tools.
I know people who are doing the similar thing to what you did there, where they've got the idea and they're like, oh, we need to make the app look perfect. It's like, and like you said, like you need customers first, because even if you have the best idea in the world and you might think you have everything covered, as soon as it starts being used by real customers, it's always going to be things that you didn't think of, or like that's the whole process, right? And even now, I guess you're going to have things that people want to be added to the app or things to be changed, because that's just the nature of any product. But I think sometimes when people are at the start, they really focus on perfection, but that stops you from actually getting the feedback that you need to make it
100%. And you see, and I see that happening. I see other people doing that, and I still can sometimes see ourselves slipping into that as well, because it's an obvious thing that you don't want to put out crap, right? You want to put out things that you're proud of and that work, but ultimately, the most important thing is like solving the customer's problem. And like, you don't need to have a whiz bang shiny app to do it. It's like, for us, it's like, what is solving the problem? It's, for our, let's say our care home customer at that point, it's like when they need a shift filled, a nurse fills the shift, they turn up and they enjoy working together, they get paid. Fantastic. Now, you can do a lot of that, in fact, all of it, without a whiz bang shiny app in the middle. Have some happy customers that are willing to talk to you, give you feedback, give you a bit of rope to hang yourself, and then you can go back and build again.
And do you have any like final advice for anybody listening today who potentially wants to do something like you've done?
Just like lean into risk and jump in with both feet. I mean, I was very lucky in that when I started the company, I didn't really have any dependents. I was living in a like really like tiny little flat that wasn't very expensive. I had a way of earning some money on the side that was relatively decent. But until the point where I really jumped in and committed everything to it, I didn't. It was at the point where I jumped in and committed everything to Florence was the point where it really like hockey sticked. And I think until you've given something your all and really wake up every morning and you put in 16, 18 hours a day of work, you don't know it's going to be successful until you've done that. So do it. And it may or may not be successful, but you'll learn a huge amount on the way that you can apply to any part of your life, any part of your career. So it'll definitely not be wasted time. It'll be probably the most valuable thing you do. And if it works out on the other side, you'll be lucky enough to have one of the best jobs in the world. So just do it.
And I like what you said there, because for a lot of people, as long as you've got enough money to kind of feed yourself, to keep a roof over your head, then even if you fail your business, then you just learn a ton of lessons, right? And that can be applied later on. It can help you in something else. So when you're failing, you're really learning. And it's like, totally. As long as you don't take it to extreme, like don't like actually get rid of your entire all of your belongings, that if you fail, then you're on the streets. But like I said, there's so much learning experience you can have through that. And for people listening now who want to hear more about you and more about Florence, where should they go to? Where do you want them to head to?
Where do I want to head to? Head to my LinkedIn. You can send me a message. See if you want to have a chat, have a coffee, hit me up, and be happy to share some of my thoughts.
And what about Florence? It's in the app stores, I guess?
Florence is in the app stores, yeah. So you can visit us at florence.co.uk or type in Florence in the app store and we should come up first or second.
For the international markets you're launching as well, is that still florence.co.uk or?
FlorenceApp.com is our international domain. I'm really trying to get Florence.com, but it's proving to be very challenging.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me, Emma.